Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the show with Parliament resuming today or electing a new speaker today. Joining me now to discuss all of that is a panel of MPs. So joining me is Adam Van Koeverden, the Liberal MP for Milton, Scott Aitchison, the Conservative MP for Parry Sound Muskoka, and Heather McPherson, the NDP MP for the riding of Edmonton Strathcona. Adam, I'll start with you. Maybe just speak a little bit about, obviously, the House of Commons elected a new speaker today. We heard from Justin Trudeau and Aaron O'Toole, Jagmeet Singh as well, and the Bloc Québécois leader. But maybe speak a little bit about the throne speeches happening tomorrow. Speak a little bit about maybe from just your personal standpoint, some things that you would like to see acted on.
Well, thanks, Wyatt. First, it's really nice to see you again. You've been doing a great job, and Canada's super proud of all the work that you're doing. You're setting the bar really, really high for other 12-year-olds, though. So I think there's also a lot of 12-year-olds and probably 13 to 18-year-olds that are aspiring to be journalists, and way to go. You're doing a great job. First, congrats to my friends, Heather and Scott. I saw you guys both today, so it's nice to see you in the House of Commons. We've both kept in touch. Well, the three of us have kept in touch occasionally, and I've been to both of your ridings in the last year, which is actually pretty cool. Scott knows that I come up regularly, and we met up once since the election. But Heather and I,
a little further afield.
Haven't traveled to Edmonton too much in the last 2 years, but just recently for the soccer game where the Canadian men beat the Mexican side for the first time in 21 years. Super exciting. So, Wyatt, you asked. Yes, indeed, tomorrow is the throne speech, and I'm really excited for it. I'm looking forward to hearing about all of our commitments going forward. Obviously, a platform is something that's difficult to distill down into a speech that can be anywhere from, I suppose, 10 to 20 minutes. We're not really sure how long it'll be. I'm looking forward to renewed commitments on walking the path of truth and reconciliation and fighting climate change, but also ending this pandemic and making sure that we do everything that we can to stand up for Canadians, to make sure their businesses stay afloat, to make sure their families can continue to pay their bills. And, you know, one of the things that I've been really thrilled to follow along in is the progress on our climate change, of course, climate change, but our progress on the childcare commitment. It's a lot of double C's. So climate change and childcare are both really, really important. But this is the way we build our pandemic back, is to ensure that everybody can get back to work. And I meant to say economy. Sorry, we've been talking a lot today. This is the way that we build our economy back and end this pandemic. So maybe I'll stop there.
And Scott, maybe speak a little bit about, obviously, the Conservatives ran an election campaign as well. Speak maybe, though, a little bit about specifically some things that maybe the Conservative Party ran on in the last election that you're hoping to maybe see in the throne speech tomorrow.
Well, on a very personal note, I should first say too that Wyatt, I have to tell you that I'm really impressed with what you do. I feel like I finally arrived because I'm now finally on the Wyatt Sharp program. So I'm feeling very honored. I'll try not to stumble over my words, but I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me. Obviously, for me, one of the things I certainly talked a lot about, and I know that all parties talked about during the election campaign, is housing. It's a crisis across this country, and I know that there's been a lot of talk about it, and we need some more action. And so I'm looking forward to what's actually going to be talked about in the throne speech related to housing specifically. In a more broader context, the Conservative Party's talked an awful lot about the cost of living getting a lot higher in this country. It's certainly a concern for families to pay for groceries and all the daily necessities of life. It's getting more expensive. And so we're concerned about inflation. We're concerned about, the impact that, government spending is having on that inflation. And so I think that we're looking forward to seeing what proposals are coming forward that, as Adam said, it's a very important thing for us to get past this pandemic, get out of it, do the things that we need to be doing to bring our economy back to thriving and addressing the issues we need to address, like climate change, like childcare, like housing, but also doing so in a responsible way that makes sure that we're not making life too expensive for Canadians at the same time.
And Heather, I'll ask you the next question. So obviously the Speech of the Throne, as we've been talking about, is going to happen tomorrow. The NDP has been talking a lot about, even during the election and after the election, prior to the election, about things like universal pharmacare or universal dental care. Maybe speak a little bit about if you see any opportunities to work with any of the other parties on any of these issues, and just whether or not you'd like to see them in the throne speech and how you'd like to see them implemented.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Wyatt. Well, and it is, I have to say, congratulations to my colleagues as well. It is really nice to be back in Ottawa. It was nice to be in the House today. It was a bit odd as we learn how to be back in big groups again, but it did feel exciting, and it did feel nice to see everybody and have that chance to see people face to face. I know we're on a Zoom, but the potential for us to have a face to face conversation, I think, is really exciting. And I guess what I wanted to start with as well is just to say that when we look at the throne speech, what we have to be considering right now is what's happening in British Columbia. Like, I think it's really important we take a moment to think about the devastating climate emergency that's playing out with the flooding and the destruction in British Columbia, and just how terrible that is for folks right now. So when we look at the throne speech, when we look at what's coming tomorrow, I mean, New Democrats want to see some real action on climate change and on the climate crisis, and we want to see what that looks like. Because one of our big problems as New Democrats, one of the roles that I see as a New Democrat, is that my job is to make sure that the government, whether it's Liberals or Conservatives, follow through on the promises they make. Because often they're really good at making promises and not keeping them. And for example, when you look at the climate crisis, Canada has never, ever, ever met its targets. We set targets and we never meet them. So my job is to make sure that our the words that we say we follow through on and we actually live up to. And that goes with all kinds of things. That, of course, dealing with the climate crisis. I think that almost everybody in the House of Commons realizes that this is our primary first priority. But yeah, making life more affordable for Canadians right now, making sure that there are jobs for folks that, I'm from Alberta, and I want the federal government to invest in workers in my province to make sure that those folks have a job, have a future that can sustain their families, that they can continue to use the skills that they have. So all of those things are really important, but things like pharmacare, we've heard those promises before, and we don't have pharmacare, and we should. It makes sense. It makes sense on a whole bunch of fronts. Pharmacare, dental care, all of those things I will be continuing to fight for. Housing, of course, is vitally important and will continue to work for. And yeah, I mean, in Alberta, we're the most recent province to get childcare. Awesome news. So incredible for women across Alberta. I'm really excited that we have that in place. I hope Ontario's next.
And Adam, you've heard lots from Scott and Heather regarding, there was a mention of inflation. Heather mentioned climate change. Scott also mentioned housing. So maybe just speak a little bit about some of those issues and how big of a factor you'd like to see them play in the next parliament.
Sure. Thanks, Wyatt. I hope I can speak for my friends that when I say that we kind of agree on a lot of things, Heather and Scott and I. We chat often and we kind of work towards similar ambitions. So as much as you might hear us argue in the House of Commons, we are collaborating and working together to make sure that the Canada that you inherit is as good or even better as the Canada that we inherited from our parents. So I know that we're all wholly committed to these challenges, and I totally agree that the cost of living is getting untenable for a lot of Canadians, and we need to make sure that their biggest expense, which is generally accommodations and lodging, doesn't completely take over from that. And there's so many Canadians who are renting and paying off somebody else's mortgage. And as a kid that grew up in a co-op, I find that kind of distressing. I believe in public housing. I really believe in non-market housing as a solution for this housing crisis. I know that people want to buy homes and people should be able to buy homes, but not everybody needs to buy a home, and people need safe and secure housing. I think that the end of the housing continuum from abject homelessness to the other side is secure housing, not necessarily home ownership. My mother's never owned a home, and she's got secure housing and a pension and an RRSP and a great future to look forward to. So I'm really pushing on co-op housing and non-market housing. I had a great meeting last week with the Co-op Housing Federation of Canada and a bunch of my MP colleagues. I followed along the Vote Housing campaign throughout our campaign, and I wanted to hear from them about what their ideas were, because I'm a big believer that governments don't have all the answers. We really do have to lean on sectors. We need to ask business people. We need to ask developers. We need to ask academics. even philosophers, how do we move forward as a country? And on housing specifically, I know there's lots of different ways to solve this crisis, and I've decided just to buckle down and be really focused on one of those. And the one that I'm going to focus on in this next parliament is co-op housing and non-market solutions to the housing crisis, so that new families, young people, students, in my family experience, it was when my parents split up, and my mom wasn't in a position to go and buy a house, so she moved into a co-op. And guess what? My brother and I, with my dad, who lived in another home, got to grow up with access to summer camp, guitar lessons, kayaking, all sorts of things. We never went without, and it was because of co-op housing. So I think that's probably my time on my pitch for co-ops and non-market housing.
And very quickly, I know all of you are on a strict deadline, so maybe if I can just try and fit 2 more questions in quickly to Scott. Maybe you've heard a bit of mention on childcare. Obviously, during the election, the Liberals and Conservatives' plan for childcare were different from each other. So maybe if you could just take a brief couple of moments to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think childcare is clearly very important, and I think that the federal government is working with the provinces to get those programs in place. My concern, of course, is always that this has been the pattern in our federal-provincial relationship. It started with healthcare, where we created a universal healthcare system by promising to pay half the costs. And then, of course, the federal government promptly stopped paying half the costs. And so my fear, of course, is that provinces are struggling financially. The parliamentary budget officer has issued a report showing that all the provinces, save and except for Quebec, are fiscally unsustainable. And now we've come up with a new program that we're going to get the provinces to do by promising to pay half the costs. And so I think Ontario has not signed on yet because of their concerns about the financial implications, and if it is in fact enough money for them to do it. And so the devil, as they say, is always in the detail. But I know that they're working towards solving the problem. And I'm a conservative, so my approach to these things is generally not to have a big government program, but to give money back, to let parents keep more money in their own pockets, and work with the private sector to see if we can assist with creating new childcare spaces, but also making sure that parents can make their own choices, the best choices for themselves. So I may disagree with the details of how the Liberal government is getting it done, but the importance of childcare couldn't be more overstated than it is right now. So it is important, and we need to find solutions. And I'm glad that the province of Ontario is working towards that.
And Heather, just so everyone can go by the time that they need to, maybe just quickly, you're from Alberta, obviously, where obviously a lot of Canada's oil and gas sector kind of is from. So maybe just speak a little bit about, just give some input on how you think we can continue to fight the climate crisis, and maybe speak specifically about what role the oil and gas sector should or shouldn't have in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's like a perfect question, though the fact that you're not giving me very much time for a very complex question makes it a little bit tricky, but I'll do my very best. So here's the deal. In Alberta, we were actually in a economic crisis before COVID-19 hit, and folks in Alberta were losing their jobs. In my riding of Edmonton Strathcona, we had the highest unemployment rate for young men under 25. It was dire before COVID. And so being locked down for a year and a half, and what we've seen, the economic impacts of COVID-19 on my province obviously have not made it better. And so what we're facing in Alberta is actually a joint crisis. We have a climate crisis that I think we all acknowledge, but we also have an economic crisis. And the way through that, the solution for that, the way that we're going to help Alberta is that the federal government has a key important role in investing in Alberta, and investing in infrastructure, and investing in technologies to help Alberta transition so that, oil and gas isn't going anywhere, but it does need to be a much smaller piece of our energy sector. We do need to invest more in renewables. We do need to invest in other technologies like geothermal, like hydrogen. We need to reclaim some of those oil wells, all of these things that could get folks working. If we retrofitted our buildings, if we had investment programs from the federal government to retrofit buildings in Alberta, that is a massive solution for climate change, and also make sure that folks still have jobs, they can still feed their families. Because the thing is, folks can't care about climate change that will happen a year or 2 years down the road if they can't feed their families, if they can't pay for the things they're housing today. So those are those things. For Alberta, it is this joint crisis that we're facing. And Alberta contributed an awful lot to the federal government, to Canada over the decades. And I kind of feel like it's time for the federal government to recognize the obligation that they have to Albertans. I have so much more I could tell you about this, but I know I'm running out of time. But maybe we could do a whole show on Alberta one day. I'd be happy to come back.
And I would sign up for that. I would love to talk about that, Heather. It's great topic.
Hey, Scott, I think there's enough conservative MPs in Alberta that you can create some space for some Albertan conservatives as well.
Well, we have Liberals and New Democrats too. So there you go.
All right.
It's nice
Still
to see
another
all
green.
three parties represented there.
Thank you all so much for joining me, and best of luck.
Nice
Thanks,
to see
Wyatt.
everybody.
See you guys.
Thanks very much.